And the big difference between the two of them is that defensive living beings, us included, are going to prefer to avoid, flee, or freeze and avoid a conflict at all costs. And then if you can't use flight, then you're going to use fight, right? And that's where you get distance-seeking aggression, right? And that includes protective guarding. Instrumental, both of these are instrumental, by the way. They're not just reactive. Now, they can become reactive or impulsive. That's part of what you've got to figure out. But there are instrumental functions for both defensive and offensive aggression. Offensive animals are going to not choose to flee or avoid the situation. This is exactly what they're looking for their particular reasons. And again, predation is not actually aggression, but if they have predatory drive, and that is actually what is causing them to be offensively aggressive. That's definitely very aberrant. We should not see that in our companion animals towards human beings at all. And it's also aberrant for them to be predatory towards each other, other dogs. So territorial and resource guarding, again, are more offensive triggers and reasons why dogs would go for you rather than move away from you. They both can be very dangerous and look particularly ugly, but because the underlying motivation and driver and function for the behavior is different, it should be handled and responded to, especially from a behavior modification perspective, very differently. So here you go. I'll give you an example of this pretty lady here, Faith. She's a dog that we had with us until she passed. She passed with me in foster with me. And she's a kind of one of the, what's the word I'm looking for? Stars of the show today. So you're going to see a lot of her bad behavior, but we loved her. But she was not a placement candidate. You'll see why.
Oh, that's it. Bang. Oh! You okay? Okay.
Bad dog, right? So that's a tricky one, right? Was she being defensive or offensive there, right? Obviously, I think that was a matter of being on leash. And she's an American Bulldog, has tendencies for guarding behavior. So was she telling that lady to stay away because she was being more protective? But maybe that was her driver, but it was very offensive and forward, right? She had lots of options. She could have done some threat displaying and asked her for distance in a different way rather than just taking the opportunity to pop her. It's a bad dog. So the common misapplications that we face sometimes or misunderstandings. I actually should change this. I'm making a note for myself. Misapplications to misunderstandings. This pertains to when I have other slides in front of it that I took out. Dogs must remain below threshold to be successful. We talked about this a lot yesterday, and we're going to show you lots of examples of it in this one too. In real life, the truth is we cannot always control our environment, what's happening around us. This pertains to people as much as it pertains to dogs. We're talking about resiliency. We're talking about coping skills. We're talking about physical health, because there's some psychological being stout psychologically. All those kinds of things revolve around when things aren't going our way and when things get a little tough, or when things are, if we face a struggle, how do we cope with that? And so a lot of the dogs that come to us that have behavior problems, it's because they don't know how to deal with these situations that they're not comfortable with. And so for us, we're talking about expanding those thresholds. Thresholds means that you can't always remain below threshold, because the world is not going to work around you that way. You're going to end up facing challenges. And so we want both people, when I was doing private training, people in shelters as much as my private clients, hey, you could be walking around the corner on your block and you don't know what you're going to face. And so what happens if you come across something that completely blows your dog's threshold? Both you and your dog need to know how to get yourselves organized, get back together and recover from that, and get back into something that is organized. Corrections will create a worse association with a stranger, right? So if we correct, now this can be very true, and we're going to get into the real nitty gritty of this, when you would use corrections and when you would not. But it is not always true that just because if a dog is behaving badly in the presence of a stranger and you correct them, that will create a negative association with the stranger. That is not necessarily always true, but you have to be careful when you do that. Distracting is not the same as training. So when I've seen some protocols and some folks that are saying, well, this is the progress that I've made with my stranger danger dog, and basically all they're doing is luring or bribing the dog through exercises in the presence of a stranger, that is not the same as teaching the dog one of those essential skills where the dog is responsible for their behavior and can demonstrate some impulse control and observe from afar and start to make decisions and possibly think differently about the person because they're free to make their own decisions rather than just following their nose around after treats. And we're big believers in that we all learn from our mistakes. The dogs, sometimes we've got to give the dogs the opportunity to make mistakes. We can give them the information so that they learn something about that, not just by telling them what they can do and what the right thing is. There's definitely value in saying, oh, that was the bad idea, right? So fancy footwork, again, this is the foundation. The foundation for everything with us is always allowing dogs to be dogs and having social interaction with each other. So whatever behavior problem you're dealing with, we're always going to see, can being around your same species and acting like dogs together, is that going to help balance you out? Or we're going to see a reduction in whatever problem it is that you're having? Even when dogs are sent to us for dog aggression, we're trying to get to that too. Next layer of our foundation is basically leash work. We call it fancy footwork because we're talking about quieting your hands and not using the leash so much to get the dogs to do what you want, and really understanding that the leash is there to keep them attached to you so they can't just run off and be free, and then also used for to back up and reinforce the things that you're asking of the dogs, and sometimes to physically guide them, but that should be extremely minimal. So we have a whole webinar that's just about the details around how we get to fancy footwork. And we also have our mentorships, our level 1, where we teach kennel routines and loose leash walking. And all of our fancy footwork are basically style and technique for getting dogs to walk politely on leash. But this is the gist of what the foundation of it. And we definitely feel like...
Do you want me to join the middle?
So, welcome.
Yes, please.
You can watch this while I'm blathering at you. This is just kind of an end product of the style of leash handling and training that we do. For us, the reason that I came to this from working with private clients, teaching dogs how to heel and everything, I was never a competitive, obedience trainer. So I didn't teach a competition heel, but just, a nice walking for my clients, walking down the street with their dogs being on a leash, being able to go to the coffee shop with their dog and have to be well-mannered, that kind of loose leash walking. So these dogs, some of them look like they're doing a version of a heel, not a competition heel, but a version of something like that. And some are just walking on, a little bit more length. But what you're seeing in these videos is dogs are on different pieces of equipment, but the consistency and the handling, the things that we teach in fancy footwork, this is the picture that you end up with when you handle leash and use your feet the way we prescribe, and you respond to the mistakes the dogs make in leash the way we prescribe. This is what you get. Now in this room, interestingly, this is... I would say at least half of the dogs in this class are being worked by a completely novel person that they've never met before, because this is one of our skill building weeks where we joined the team at Longmont behavior team there. So anyway, that's what we can tell you. This is what it looks like when you learn fancy footwork from us. Oh, I hate when that happens. Okay, let me get rid of these things again. Get out of that a different way so I don't have to keep doing that. Okay. So their foundational skills, what the dogs are going to need to learn before you start rolling in trying to introduce them to people a little bit differently, they need to have some kind of a stationary position that is proofed well and finished, that they can do it under any circumstances with distance. DDD equals distance, duration, distraction. So it has to be a sit, a down, or middle, which is pictured here when the dogs are trained to be between your legs. We learned that as a critical skill from J-Jack. And if you guys have never looked into J-Jack, two of the people that we've learned, kind of the most from is J-Jack, and he's got GRC Dog Sports, which is, oh my God, I'm going to draw a blank on it. I'm drawing a blank, maybe Laura will pipe in for me. GRC Dog Sports, and then Ivan Balabanov is Training Without Conflict. Those are their pages if you want to go check them out. Anyway, so the dogs have to have a sit down or a middle and really trained well already before you start getting into this next level. Tolerance for sustained eye contact. This is one of the biggest things that I figured out within the last 2 years that we've been refining, that the average person, when they're worried or they're going to beat your dog, or they think your dog is maybe going to be not comfortable with them, they're going to stare at your dog. We intuitively know when to avert our eyes to make the dogs more comfortable, but the average person does not necessarily know how to do that. So we started training the dogs to be able to tolerate sustained eye contact from a person, and that should be an environmental cue for them to look at us.
Sure.
Just because she's so
You see that?
Yeah.
But do you see in her how she was air stiffened like, dude, like that's not right,
Yeah, and that
you know?
would look different than the first
Yeah.
two rats.
Before she just wasn't paying attention yet because she was observing other things, but you can see it makes her uncomfortable. Yes, good girl, good girl. Because if you imagine, what I'm thinking is, most people when they're in collaring up a dog, if they have any worry, they're going to be watching the dog like a hawk. And I've noticed recently that when I feel uncomfortable with a dog, I automatically avert my eyes while I'm collaring them.
Yeah.
Right? So isn't that, we just probably didn't even realize how we were doing that intuitively. Interestingly, Ashley, you're going to see her a bunch in this presentation too. She had stranger danger, that's why she came to us, and she very specifically would pop you in the face, not bite, but muzzle punch and try to get distance by popping you in the face. That was her very bad habit. So this one's hysterical. I love this video. This is Faith.
So we're putting Faith through.
Hey, nothing much. Come on in.
Okay, so does she like you, Mark, or does she not like you?
It's undecided.
Oh, okay. All right, so your job is to stare at her,
Oh,
okay?
yes, ma'am.
And then next time when she looks at you, even like put your hands on your thighs and kind of bend forward and like you're looking at her. Yay! Good girl. That was so good. That's cool. You can go. That's what we needed. That was it.
See you later, Faith.
It's like next time you're mine. Good girl. Mama is so good. It just cracks me up, man.
Hi. This is my dog, Faith.
She loves you, doesn't she?
She doesn't love me. I mean, I handle her.
Okay,
but
well,
I'm not
same
taking
thing
her
then.
out there.
Give her the bend over and. Yeah, good girl, Mama. It's like she has to really decide if she can take her eyes off of
I mean,
you.
I handle it. I'm here. I handle like issues with her, but it's not like, does she love me?
Yeah, okay, I got it. Good
I
girl.
think it's just funny, you know. Like,
Yeah.
She's like, "What are you doing?"
Good girl. All right. I
Hysterical,
think-
right? So investigating something on cue, we call it a check it out, but you can call it whatever you want to call it. And we always start with novel items before we then overlay that onto people. And this means that you have to investigate with your nose when we say check it out.
And he can do, yes, good boy. Very nice. Okay, next.
Very simple, investigate on cue. They have to be fluent in pressure and release. And for those of you that have made it through any of our series before today, you're probably going to be like, yeah, we get it, pressure and release. To us, you are only going to be exceptionally good if you learn to love and embrace negative reinforcement as much as positive reinforcement, and you get good at pressure and release work, especially for shelter dogs. Because for many of them, there are so many reasons why positive reinforcement in the moment is not going to cut it for them. And how do we teach them anyway? So ability to receive positive reinforcement, even if just supportive affection. So there's got to be some way, by the time you're introducing them to people that they're going to be nervous about, you have to be able to know that there is something that you can positively reinforce your dog with in those moments. Okay. And again, you guys have heard our little thing that we use all tools and techniques to support animals to rewardable behavior. So creating positive associations, like this is pretty easy for most of us. If you're adhering to a positive reinforcement only program, this is going to be like one of your biggest strategies. And so, of course, we start here as well. So in sheltered playgroups, by the way, if you have dogs that are just nervous about people, especially if they've not demonstrated any aggression, they're just avoidant of strangers, a really easy way to get them accustomed to being around more new people. If they love to be out in groups and playing with dogs, just bring other people into the mix and have them around, because they create that association. Oh, you're part of this really positive kind of pack activity. So they really do like that. nose work in their presence, getting dogs to get their nose investigating other things. This is why we have it on to investigate with your nose is a really good way to reduce their stress and also take the focus off of the new person, so that if you have a dog that's really inclined to nose work, make it fun and just let them do that around a new person. We have moved away. We're going to talk a lot more about this, moving away from feeding dogs from hand. And so being able to toss treats away from a stranger and having dogs drop their nose to the ground and start searching for that. We've actually been doing that a lot more. We just name it, find it, so that when we say to our dogs, hey, find it, they are automatically dropping their nose and starting to search for something, because we're just flinging treats and naming it, find it. Non-confining barrier greetings, which means not necessarily with a dog in a kennel, although, again, a thing that I don't think we even have it in here, but if you've got dogs that are fractious in your kennels, having as many people as possible working click for quiet is a great way to start in the kennel. But outside of the kennel, non-confining barrier greetings allows both the dog and the stranger to relax without the dog being protective of that space. Although you will have some dogs like Faith here. She used to be protective if anybody was on the other side of a fence, no matter how large the fence was. It wasn't even specific to her kennel.
Yes, good girl. And that's perfect, Anya. You just feed her in position, right?
So this dog, Kate here, she was like, boy, one of our best dogs that we worked with. She came from a shelter in Connecticut, and she was very reactive to people in the kennel. She had bitten someone's fingers through the kennel when they stuck their fingers in, and she was with us for a while, and she had very natural protective tendencies of her handler. She actually liked people, and she enjoyed people. You could see her there. She enjoyed meeting people, but if she felt that person was at all going to be a threat to her person, she felt compelled to do something about that and chase them away. But she was really solid. She was always, once you introduced her to someone, she was always solid. You could see by letting her see all those strangers along that fence line and then giving her treats and asking her for things, you could see her tail was wagging, a nice, low, happy wag. She didn't seem to have any tension or concern. So it allowed them all to get comfortable with each other before we just all started walking through the free room together. So that could be a good intermediary step. Cooperative drive expression games, again, Ivan most specifically, and then J-Jack really, really, really pushed us to use a lot more play, especially over food, to really fulfill the dogs while we're teaching them to do this challenging stuff. So you should check out their websites for sure. The triangle, you do have to have a reliable drop, so you have to know how to train a drop. You can look at 50 million videos on YouTube and pick which technique you want to use to teach a drop, because there's many of them. Triangle fetch is something that we learned from Ivan. Seemed pretty common sense.
Mika, triangle fetch.
Good girl! Bring it! Yes, good girl. Good.
So Cody is a stranger to Mika, and so being handled directly by a stranger right away was really nerve-wracking for Mika, but she loved to fetch.
Girl, bring it.
We'll turn the volume down. She loved to fetch, so she could bring the ball back to the person that she already has some relationship established and that she's comfortable with. But then the fun part, the throw, is delivered by the stranger. Talk about creating a positive association. Now, relinquishing the ball for some dogs is a real problem. Some do it really happily and easily, anticipating the next throw. Some dogs really struggle with relinquishing. So you have, again, the known person do the relinquishment piece, which maybe is a drag, and the positive part comes from the stranger. Okay. So the ABCs of treatment, again, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. Michael Shikashio talks about this all the time. It's his main shtick. But all of this is very true, that breaking down the ABCs to resolve issues. You have to decide, first of all, what is the trigger, the antecedent, the perceived threat, the stranger, whatever. Then the dog is behaving whatever way they're behaving, right? That behavior is something that you either want or you don't want, right? And then there's going to be a consequence for their behavior that is either going to reinforce that behavior and make it happen more, or is going to be punitive and make that behavior happen less, right? It's just not that complicated. So reinforcement to increase desired behaviors, which would be anything. We like anything other than reactivity. So marking and rewarding the approximations. This is most of you are really familiar with that. And in these situations, I definitely prefer to use food than toys, because when you are playing with dogs, I like using food more in the introduction, teaching new concepts to a dog. And then I like to transition to play if they have drive so we can reward them with play. But I always like using food because it keeps them more organized. Like the play kind of gets them, thinking about different things and bouncing around and everything. Pressure and release with body or leash to reinforce proper position. We're going to see more about that. And remove from the exercise as a release of pressure. Those are all different ways to reinforce the dogs to do more of what we want. And then punishment to decrease the unwanted behaviors would qualify as like body blocking, yielding the dogs, a light leash or collar correction for breaking position, not necessarily for fussing at the person, but for breaking the position, right? Because if you're training a dog to sit or lay down or to stay between your legs in the parking position, like in this picture, then that's what they should be doing until you release them or ask them to do something different. That's just basic training. If you start to do any of these kind of exercises that we're going to get into and your dog loses it, that just means you're in too deep. You've got to back it up and build on that foundation a little bit more. And consider abandonment drills as an option of negative punishment if the dogs are erupting. So what that means, we'll show you an example here.
Hey, girl. Hey, Bridget.
Good.
Yes, good girl, Dory. Oh, yeah. Look at you.
Okay, so Dory she was set up there so she's back tied to the tree on purpose. So she's with LaRue, and as people are coming out and popping in and out of the courtyard, Dory is very protective, especially when she's on leash. So LaRue's staying there with her. And Cody had come out and Dory started erupting. And then Rob had come out and Dory started erupting. So what she's doing is when Dory erupts, we didn't catch the eruption. There's some eruption. So she's going to leave Dory, like, oh, I'm not sticking around with you when you do that. And then she goes to the other person and demonstrates, this person's not a threat. This person is actually my friend. Now Dory's focused on Cody. So that's what an abandonment drill is it means you're set up so that when your dog is erupting, you leave them and they're kind of on their own. And oftentimes they will quiet down right away and be like, wait a minute, what's happening? So if their barking sends their person away, that's a possibility. It's a way to negatively punish barking, okay? Or erupting, whatever that might be. So you get the gist of that. Safety first, okay, before we get into this, because the worst thing, I think none of us have been more mortified than when you're trying to introduce a dog to a potential adopter. Bites the adopter, right? Ugh. Horrible, right? So as we're practicing and preparing so that doesn't happen anymore, we definitely are big believers in using safety gear. Now, this is a picture of my son, Willen, in one of our bite suits, which is definitely overkill. But, remember, we have an advanced training and behavior center. We're not using the bite suits because we do bite work with the dogs. It's because it's so that we can practice all these things. And if the dogs make a mistake, they can't hurt us, right? So the first thing that you need to determine when you're starting to get through these exercises is what is the redirection or lunge risk for your dog. So you've got to decide the right protocol based upon that. And then what tools does your dog need, or are they going to respond to the best depending upon what their troubles are? If they tend to be reactive, especially with redirection, and you heard this yesterday, any reactivity, we like to acclimate dogs to head halters. You've got better control of their head. You can minimize their potential to land a bite. And also in this situation where you are going to let dogs approach people, and that is the ultimate goal, it is okay to condition them to using a muzzle and having that be part of your initial introductions.
Right.
There's Faith again, my bad actor.
Come check her out. Good girl. Ooh, that's very nice. Good girl. Good girl. Good. Very good. Okay, great.
Now, we learned from Faith. That was Dr. Crawford, by the way, from University of Florida. We love her. She loves to come up and be bait for us. I had the muzzle on Faith because I did not feel confident at all that she wouldn't try to get a bite in there. And you see how when I was petting Faith and she was pretty comfortable with Dr. C, she wasn't looking at her. She's like, okay, I know this drill, so I'm comfortable. I've got the muzzle on. I know that drill. But as soon as I left, she turned back to Dr. C to drive her away. That's normal. We learned from that you should never just depart and leave your dog with a stranger. And so that's why you're going to see us doing these left-hand circles moving forward. But if you are going to use a muzzle because your dog is going to take some long-term work, then be fair about it and acclimate them. I think many of you have seen us in our playgroup seminars. There's times we just put a muzzle on the dog and they're not acclimated, it's just to get them in there and get them over that first hump. But if you do, even in playgroup work, if you do know that you're going to use a muzzle consistently for a dog, then you got to take your time to acclimate them to it. And then sometimes, for those of you that are at this webinar that own your dogs, and if you have a dog that you just feel like might be a bite risk no matter what you've done, then when you're in public, then the socially responsible thing to do is just have them in a muzzle so that just in case you come around a corner and somebody reaches for your dog, that you're safe and they're safe. Handle really well to support your dog. So you've heard us nagging about no short, tight leashes. It removes their opportunity for flight and is going to provoke them into fighting and reacting more if you keep them restrained. That another, train, don't restrain is one of our other catchphrases. Be prepared to block and yield your dog and get between them and the other person. Now, obviously you run the risk, especially with dogs that come to us originally that are pretty fractious and that don't have relationships with with us yet. We can't necessarily just start yielding right away because they're just going to bite us too. But when you have a relationship with the dog and you're past all that kind of stuff, then you do have to be prepared sometimes to, you have to be able to successfully yield your dogs. And then there's this also technique of being able to hold a leash behind your back if you think that they're going to lunge forward. And we'll show a video of that in a little bit. Consider safety gear for your handlers and your strangers too. We put one of our strangers in a bite suit, just in case.
And I was just, please. Good boy. Good. And I was just telling you the other day.
Yeah.
That's a good boy. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, follow me back in. We'll go this way. Thank you so much for coming.
Okay, so Warren just texted me to define yielding. Okay. So you can see this whole setup. We had this dog back tied and everything because he had actually popped a couple of people in the ankles pretty successfully. So yielding means that you're, rather than pulling your dog out of a situation and drawing them out of a situation, usually with a leash or by trying to cajole them, when you're going to get in front of them and drive them out and yield them. And so you're going to see us talking about doing left-hand circles a lot with our dogs, because when your dog's walking on your left and you turn left, you're taking that space and they have to concede that space and you are yielding them. Is a very different exercise than an about face or a right-hand turn, where the dogs are expected to just keep up with you and pay attention to where you are by catching you. And it swings them on the outside that way. Whereas if you turn left, it actually blocks them and yields them. Okay. Safety gear for strangers. The bite suit is overkill, like I said, but we use a lot more of like Kevlar pants, gloves, sleeves. Make sure you've got good protective shoes on and puncture resistant stuff. And then the second line, you saw that in the last video that Monica had a long line type so that Hudson had the sense that he was just being asked to stay on place and that he wasn't restrained. But if he had broken and gone forward, she also had the ability to stop him.
All right, you are good to knock, Sarah. Place. Come on. Good boy. Place. You're so cute. Hello. Welcome in. Have a seat. Thank you. I'm gonna sit down on the ground next to you. Place. Yes, good boy. Good boy.
So if you can see in this video, she has that long line run back through a pulley. So she has the ability to prevent him from coming forward and putting pressure and release on him. By moving away from him, she can prevent him from coming towards them. Pulley systems are like amazing to work with. They make all the difference in the world for the dogs because they can see that picture of you stopping them without you having to come to them. And so they can put that together really nicely. So we've come up with this whole thing, we call it DPFL's meet and greet routine. We modified, originally we were training dogs to do like a CGC greeting, which is the Canine Good Citizen greeting, the test that you go through. It's an AKC test. Those tests are wonderful, and in the spirit, we want to support the spirit of CGC. It's supposed to be a test that owners can go through with their dogs to demonstrate that out in public, my dog is polite on leash and can be out in public politely. So in the spirit of that, that is not a test that dogs with behavior issues, especially stranger danger issues, they shouldn't be CGC certified because it's kind of not the truth of what it's about. So when we have our dogs that we want to be out and about with that don't qualify for that CGC, we want to still teach them skills to help them navigate our world a little bit better, and that's more supportive of them. So that CGC greet was that you stop and sit with your dog and a person approaches you and then bends down and pets your dog and starts investigating your dog all over while your dog holds a sit. So obviously for the ones that we're talking about that are stranger danger dogs, that is a poor setup for them, and most of them are never going to be successful with that. So we want to try to change their mind and their experience about what strangers means. We definitely don't want them to be confined with no opportunity to flee and allow people to just invasively handle them. And you don't ever want to extinguish warnings. To me, that's just so important, whether you're doing dog stuff or dog to people stuff. When dogs take their time to lip curl, snarl at you, I don't like that, growl at you, that's their way of saying that they don't want to have to be aggressive with you. So we want to honor that. And then know that, okay, we have some work to do to make this dog feel more comfortable in the situation.
This is a sustained eye contact drill for Volcano. And hold still. If she lunges at you, Natalie is not going to let her get you. Yes, good girl. Now you can talk to her like you're trying to make her feel comfortable, but stay bent over and staring at her. Yes, good girl. And
most important thing here that I want you to notice is that Natalie, who was working with Volcano, if you could hear, there was a light growl there. So of course, a person standing in front of you, especially with a mask, bending over and staring at your dog, is going to make most dogs uncomfortable. But if you notice, the most important thing here is that Natalie is not trying to prevent Volcano from responding the way she authentically wants to respond. Not only is she preventing her from that, she's just waiting and letting her make her decision, observing her choices, and then giving her feedback about those choices. And she is not correcting her for growling. You can growl, that's fine. You're telling us you're uncomfortable. We respect that. And then when she's able to break contact and look at Natalie, that's always the rewardable behavior. And over time, we had a whole line of students. Those were University of Florida students, the vet students with Dr. C. They all came and bent in front of her. And by the end, she was like, yeah, this drill. Okay. Too much burden on the dog, and we need to advocate more.
Monica, she's visiting. She delivered a dog, Ben to us, and so she's acting like bait for the day.
Okay, so Moopy here was one of the most, on a scale of 1 to 10, probably a 15 as far as barrier activity to people. He liked people, but he's just nervous. He just didn't assume that he needed to learn about you before he could trust you. And so he was one of the most frightening dogs I've seen behind a barrier, but relatively easy to introduce him to people once you got him out of his kennel and out of that scenario. But Monica here is a legitimate stranger to him. And so this is him going through the routine. And I want you to just to see how advocating for the dogs means that we're not putting him in the position of having to figure out about the stranger. The handler is demonstrating for him that this person is safe, right? So this is why it's important that they have this stagnant position already trained.
Like be bait for me.
She's very agreeable bait.
Awesome. I'm just gonna have him come up and sit here and just be chill. You don't have to pet him or anything. Actually, I would prefer you not pet him. Whoopee. Check it out. Yes, good boy. You're looking for a treat though. I know. Let's go.
Nice. That feels great. I mean, how do they feel to you? Is anybody?
Now, a couple of things. That was when we started doing the meet and greet, we had decided that this was kind of the system, and we were still feeding the dogs. It's very rare that we're going to use food in the scenario anymore. We're going to get into a lot more detail about that. But if you notice that he did his check it out, he waited patiently, he was observing the whole thing, waited for permission to come check out Monica. And you can see it's almost like a trick for him at this point. He wasn't concerned at Monica. He'd already decided on his own, like, yeah, I'm not worried about this. You seem cool to me. I trust this routine. So by the time he went to sniff her, he knows like, oh, I've got to sniff you. And that's how I earned my treat. Now that turned out to be a problem. Eventually we had some dogs that didn't necessarily feel comfortable with the person, but were willing to go up and sniff them to get the treat, but they still weren't comfortable. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't pairing those two things. I'm sure you've all had the experience where you try to have somebody feed a dog to make them feel better, and the dog tastes the treat and then snaps at them anyway, right? That means that the dog is in conflict. So you're basically trying to bribe them through something that they have no interest in doing, right? We want to separate those things and not have that happen. It is very dangerous or inappropriate for offensively aggressive dogs to be put through meeting people certainly in a CGC greet, and then also for us. So we're not looking for that. Setting up for this meet and greet routine, you're going to have a picture in your mind before you start the session with this person, or even if it's an aspect of the training, right? This is what I believe about everything. Have a picture in your mind of how you want it to go, but you've got to be prepared to switch gears because you got to read your dog in hand, right? You might need to go to an easier approximation if they're too concerned. Maybe this particular person or this novel item that you're using is just too concerning for the dog, so you might need to use something else or try something else first. Build a little bit more foundation. When repeating, because you want an improved response. Let's say the dog is starting to come in to meet the person, but they're watching the person too much and they're not really connected with you, and you've got to kind of come in and set up for it again. Keep the dogs kind of tight. Like, don't go all the way back to the beginning. Just get them organized right in that aspect of the drill that you're trying to get their focus. Be sure to have proper tools and the reinforcers for your dog, right? You guys have heard me ad nauseum. Our personal opinions about what's reinforcing or what's punitive really doesn't matter. To get over ourselves, the dog in hand is going to tell you not only in general what's reinforcing or punitive to them. They're going to tell you in this moment what is reinforcing or what is punitive to them. And you need to know those things because you are responsible for telling them, good choice, I want more of that. Bad choice, I want less of that. Communicate with a stranger. Let them know ahead of time that, hey, my dog's not too comfortable with people, so I'm going to need to support them through this, so they know, because you're going to act kind of strangely. You're not going to disconnect from your dog and speak to them freely. You're going to have some awareness of your dog, which means you're going to be weird to the person. So you have to kind of let them know that. You want to keep your eye on your dog, make sure that they're comfortable. You definitely don't want to blow their threshold to the point where they're going to come forward and come after the person, right? So you got to keep an eye on them. Read the stranger too and gauge their comfort level, because if they're nervous enough, it doesn't matter how well trained your dog is, they might be giving off such a vibe that you just don't even want your dog to be subjected to meeting them. And then formulate your plan for success for the dog and the stranger. Decide while you're sitting there picturing both of these things, okay, how are we going to proceed? What's the best way to go about this for both of you? So as you're prepping the stranger, right, your dog is in their stationary position. You can give them instructions like, just go ahead and be neutral. I'm going to let my dog sniff you if you're comfortable. Can you go ahead and turn to your side? I do this a lot for gentlemen, because front-facing gentleman with the dog that maybe is uncomfortable and that is going to come straight up to them, a little bit vulnerable there. Avoid eye contact or practice eye contact. We have leaned towards, go ahead and just stare at my dog. Like, we have most of our meet and greets now include a sustained eye contact drill. You can ask the person to give your dog a couple of commands and then possibly tossing treats. But we no longer think, if you're really dealing with a stranger danger dog, we don't think that the person should be feeding them from hand. The only time that I have a person feed the dog from hand is the dog has no issues with people. Maybe they've learned our meet and greet routine because they're so friendly that they're rude and obnoxious and they're jumpy, mouthy. Then I might let somebody feed them from hand, but we're still deciding it's probably better to be tossing treats so that they're not inclined to being up and all over the person. We also name that. We have to give, if we have the dog in a sit or in a down and they're in a stationary position, remember, we have to either release them or we have to give them or tell them to do something else. So we tend to say, find it before the person throws the treats. The dog's given permission to break that sit to go look for that treat.
Let's go.
Nice.
Good boy.
Good boy, buddy.
So in that one, Willen used the term "let's go" because he was actually going to join up with him and leave. That's called the distance meet and greet, where you start out by, I'm not going to have the dog come and approach you yet, but I want to make that positive association that you're just delivering good things for treat, but the dog isn't brought in too deep, so he gets to stay way over there. The person delivers something really great, and you're giving the dog permission to go. So Willen chose the "let's go." We tend to use "find it" now. Do or don't pet my dog, and how to pet the dog. Most of our dogs that we're working with, we're asking people not to pet them until they've gone walking with them for a while and had some time. But again, if you have a dog that you're doing all of this prepping for because they're more rude and obnoxious, like gonna distance seek and snap the person, then yeah. And if the dog is going to enjoy the petting, you can tell the person how they can pet your dog. Ensure that the person's comfortable proceeding before you have the dog approach them. And also make sure that they are listening to you and following your instructions, right? How many of you have been in that position in public where you're trying to tell people how to behave and they're like, oh, no, it's okay, dogs love me, and they just proceed anyway. Okay, so your initial approach, this is basically you are going to end up approaching the person and you're going to set your dog up in their position. Setting the dog and you to stranger. I don't know what I meant by that first bullet. Setting the dog and you. Weird. I'll have to change that. Lauren, will you make a note for me that I don't know what the heck I was saying in that first one. In the initial approach, left-hand circles. The reason that if you're trying to walk up and a person is approaching, hey, that's a really nice dog, I'd like to meet your dog, especially if it's an uncontrolled situation where you didn't expect to run into this person. As opposed to, let's say, you're bringing the dog out into the yard because you want to introduce them to a potential stranger. Either way, as you're approaching, the dog recognizes, ooh, we're heading right towards this person or they're heading towards us. Go ahead and say, hold on a second, let me get my dog organized. And if your dog is so focused on them and doesn't feel like they're with you in nice, loose leash obedience with you, then we're going to tell you to roll into some left-hand circles to yield your dog and get them kind of connected and joined up with you. Say sit and then stop. That's one of our tricks of the trade, is to have the dog sit in a nice position to promote better positioning so that they're not like leading out in front of you or swinging around and facing you when they sit. Here's an example. Trick of the trade.
So I would say sit probably 2 steps back further. So that, because remember, you say sit before you stop to help him land it well. So you have the right distance, right? Sit. Bang. Just like that. So when you say sit, then stop, it helps them line up better.
Nice. Position your leash accordingly. So if you have a dog that you have any doubt, like, especially for rowdy dogs, right? If I really feel like the dog might lunge forward to try to get at this person, I'd rather you have them in a muzzle. But let's say you're not worried about the dog lunging forward to bite the person. You just think they might lunge forward because they're anticipating getting a treat from the person, or they're just going to be too exuberant. You can put the leash behind your back so that if they start to come forward while you're talking to the person, you back up into that leash and it kind of creates a wall so they cannot access the person. Or you can also step in front of them to block and yield and push them back. And then the other thing too is if you're approaching the person, be prepared to put your let's say if this person is on my left-hand side and my dog is over there, I'm going to have my hand under the leash so that if the dog starts to approach and they approach too quickly, I can just lift up with my hand and again, create a little bit of a wall. So here's an example, leash behind the back. This is Kate again. You've already seen her. So right there, if Kate anticipated and went forward to get to Melissa, literally LaRue could step back into that leash and that would create a wall.
Good girl, Miss Kate.
Prevent her from accessing Melissa. Lauren, will you make a note for me to try to create or find a video of the left hand sliding under for the quick lift? See if we can find it. If we don't find one, we'll create one. The initial engagement, which means you and the stranger, right? So you're going to remind your dog to hold their position, and if they default to a down, that's a good thing. For me, with shelter dogs, we're not talking about competitive obedience or anything. If I tell my dog to sit, I'm going to go approach my stranger, and my dog just lays down, that's better because that just shows that they don't have any concern and they're even more comfortable. So go with it. Just name it as they start to lay down. Just let them go into a down. Use positive punishment and negative reinforcement for breaking position. So pressure on if you stand up and break, pressure off when you're back in position, and positively reinforce if they hold position, right? If you've left them and you approach the stranger and they've struggled with this before and they didn't break position, go back and reward them. Yes, that was a great trial. Let's do it again. Keep strengthening that. Step up next and close to your stranger, leaving your dog. This is so critical. This is actually the whole point of the meet and greet. And I want you, anybody that's at home thinking about your own dogs too, one of the biggest mistakes we make with dogs that are worried about strangers is you stay with your dog. You have to separate from your dog and have them perform an exercise, something that you've asked them to do, even though there's a stranger around, and they have to do that independently without you next to them, because that's going to diffuse any of the protective triggers or resource guarding triggers that they might have. It's just about them observing you, engaging naturally and normally with the person. When you stay with your dog, you tend to try to manage them and they feel all that tension, and you and your dog thinks you're worried about the person too. They don't understand that you're acting this way because you're worried about their response. They think you're acting that way because you're worried about the person. So it just sets up the dog terribly to relax about the person if you stay with them. Okay, it's one of the biggest mistakes that people make. So you're going to step up next to and close to the stranger, leaving your dog, so that just like in this picture, so the dog is observing you engaging naturally with the person, provides more safety in case they misbehave. You can just boom, get right in front and block them. Allows the dog to make eye contact and air sniff and observe you and see if they have any signs of concern. So you can be watching them and they can be watching you. Be prepared to correct any lunging or aggression at all. And you've got to be in front of them and yielding. You can't go from behind and pull back because then they're just loading up on the stranger. And then you're going to support flight. If your dog looks like they are just too frightened and they do not want to proceed, we go with consent on that one, and we don't make a dog come and approach a person if they're like, not doing it. We have one dog. I'm going to add videos of Sunshine for my next presentation. That just triggered that thought for me. Sunshine's notorious for she does this whole setup beautifully, but she never wants to come and approach the person initially. She has to then go for a walk for you for a while, and then when she's comfortable, she'll approach you. So she never consents to coming up, but she meets people really beautifully without doing that. So the final approach in the engagement is for the dog to the stranger. Once everybody's ready for that, only proceed if both the dog and the stranger are comfortable. You got to know your dog and understand what they're consenting to. You got to be able to read them well. If they're not comfortable, you can ask the person to look at them or talk to them, engage them, ask them for a command possibly, and you can be positively reinforcing your dog for holding position while this person is engaging with them from afar. You can also ask the person to toss treats to the side. Oh, sorry. So I always say, is it too much coffee or not enough coffee or I just speak too quickly? It's just a problem I have. Ask the person to toss the treats to the side. We call that the departure treat toss. And if your dog won't eat and they won't take treats when they normally would be taking treats, that is a really strong indicator that this person is making them really nervous, and end the session there. Definitely don't proceed any further. Your person can ask the dog to do certain commands and then toss the treats, same thing, and you can release them to go get the treat via free, find it, let's go. Find it if they're going to look for the treats. Let's go is if you expect them to join up with you and get going. If you say free, technically they're free to walk off and leave the whole exercise. That's why we like to tell them to do something else better. Then, when everybody's ready and feeling good about it, you can give the dog the cue to investigate. Now, when the dog is actually investigating the first person for the first time, in this picture, you see Cody is not with John, but that's because John was loving on Arby, and Cody just actually moved off to the side. They just kind of maneuvered around each other. But at the initial approach, you need to be with the person and by their side. So the dog is saying like, oh, I'm joining the two of you because this person is cool. Okay. Decide upon further engagement versus a handoff. So do you feel like, okay, my dog made it through this, investigated the person, and again, it doesn't necessarily include petting. You can very much say, can I have the person investigate you without the petting? Okay. Arby loved people, so that wasn't his problem. It's just, if somebody he didn't know came right at him. So he loved people, and once he knew the routine, he was really confident and enjoyed meeting people. So we always allowed people to pet him because it was very reinforcing for Arby. But if the dog does not want to be pet, then don't have the person pet them, and you can decide, are you going to just do a parallel walk together, or do you want to hand the dog off to the person? Now, if you see there, that departure is very, very, very on purpose. I on purpose am awkwardly stepping in front of the person and doing that left-hand circle and yielding my dog out of that picture rather than turning to the right and leaving her behind with a stranger with me departing, which is going to provoke a possible distance-seeking behavior. There's the distance toss. And this was Ashley's legitimate first time meeting Chris. He is a legitimate stranger to her. Me having up, she wasn't quite with me. She was anticipating there, so that's why I set back. And there's the way we do our handoff. Now she's Chris's dog.
You want to, actually, he's coming out of there. If you want to take her in the free room there, you can. And you can just hang out there. Huh? Okay. And then you can,
And also in the beginning, well, a lot of times, Ashley was really comfortable there, and Chris is a professional trainer, so he was comfortable feeding her. But with strangers, we'll ask people not to hand feed. The dogs for a while will actually have them mark yes and toss treats away. So they're delivering food, but the dog's not in too deep if they're a little uncomfortable. So food or no food? Let's talk about this a little bit more. Why Why is the dog reactive? What's the function of the behavior for them, right? So it's biologically incompatible if a dog is really afraid or concerned. It's really incompatible for them to eat, play, or do other things when they're in a level of distress or too much concern. So food actually doesn't make a lot of sense. We try to always counter condition or hope that by introducing food, we can change a dog's mind about something that they don't like by associating with food. Now that can work in a lot of circumstances, but it also can run the risk of quote unquote poisoning the positive, which means if this situation, we've had a number of dogs that have come to the canine center that have had negative associations with bait bags, with clickers, and with food. It's like as soon as you prevent food, their ears go back and they're avoidant or they become defensive, which is telling me that somebody was using food the wrong way for them. If they're legitimately afraid, what is usually most reinforcing? Food or no food? Lauren, can you make a note about typo? That's all, just typo. What's legitimately most reinforcing is most of the dogs just take the dog. For most dogs, it's just to get them out of that situation. They don't want to be there, so give them space and get them out of the situation. They don't want to be burdened with this responsibility. Once they're safe and out of the situation, then you could reward them for being brave. So that's why we don't use food in the moment of meeting the person, especially if they're concerned. In this picture here with little Princess, you can see how concerned she is in this picture. She did great. This was a legitimate stranger that was there to meet her, and a person that was really, a rescue person that really just wanted all the dogs to love her and wasn't doing a darn thing wrong, but it was, she's bent over, she's handing food, she's looking at her with a big face, and Princess is like, whoa, and Princess came to us for extreme stranger danger. So at any rate, she made it through this exercise because she was comfortable, she knew the routine, but she didn't like it. So we realized, let's not put her through that. So this is all the stuff that taught us to stop having people feed the dogs running out. Diffuse the function of aggression by teaching them that non-aggression works, right? So if they're warning or if they're saying, I don't want to come forward, we are going to reinforce that. We are not going to correct you for that. The unintended consequences of food is that you might poison the positive and make this whole thing, you might make them mistrust whenever you bring out food, right? It'll feel like bribery to them, and that doesn't feel good. The other thing is that we found is that for some dogs that were legitimate stranger danger or protective dogs, we've had a couple of these. The protective dogs in particular, Faith was one of them. Really happy to pop people and tell them to go away, but really loved food. So she was the kind of dog that, sure, I'll take food from you, but then I'm going to look for an opportunity to correct you anyway. And so sometimes with those dogs, if we had people feeding from hand, it was really hard for us to read the focus that the dog had on the person. Was she focused in a happy way or a not happy way?
Hi. This is
How
my
you
dog,
doing?
Champ.
Hi, Champ.
Can he come say hi to you?
Yes, he may.
Check her out.
Good.
Oh, there, you can give him a treat.
Good boy, Champ. What a good boy. Good boy, buddy. Yeah, how does he feel to you?
To me?
No, to you, to Dr. Crawford. Yeah, he feels good, right? No.
Wary.
Good boy, buddy. Okay. Now, if you end up in a situation...
that part, I don't know if you guys could tell. So Champ actually had landed bites on people before. So he did great in that exercise, but I don't know if you guys noticed. Monica was nervous because he had landed bites before, and she wasn't feeling really confident. If I take the knowledge that I have, if I'm just you and I don't know any of the players in this and I don't know the history, Champ looked good. He just looked like a normal dog that was anticipating the food. But if you notice that, he came right up to Dr. Crawford because he was anticipating those treats and he wanted those treats. I'm not convinced that he was particularly comfortable with Dr. Crawford, and nor was Monica, but it was hard to tell because he wanted that food so badly. And then you saw she was like, oh, I want to get out of here and yield him out of the way. Again, that's very important that you depart that way, because if it's not going to go well, at least you're putting yourself between your dog and the person. Assess and progress sessions. We use this term all the time. I feel like I'm a little bit behind. Let me look at where I am so I can gauge myself. Okay. Why are they concerned? What is actually motivating your dog again? They enjoy known people, but they're unsure about strangers. Are they those dogs that just see every strangers, like they've got to figure them out first? Do they have strong protective tendencies? Do they need relationship? Do they have to get to know you before they're going to trust you? Are they just under socialized? Have they had bad experiences that created negative associations? Sometimes, I'm always wary about like if somebody's a smoker, if a dog has had negative experiences around smoke, do they have an association about that or about other scents? Skin tones, we've had some dogs that just won't do well with people that are darker skinned or lighter skinned or women with blonde hair or whatever it might be. So if you see any of those things as, if there's a pattern of predictability, then you can practice for that in particular. So first you want to know, what do you think is their underlying motivation for their bad behavior potentially? And then you're going to set up safe scenarios. You're going to assess where the dog is, right? An assess and progress session means we're going to go into a situation to see any of this training that we've installed, is it impacting the dog's choices and behavior? Which means you are trying very hard to not influence what the dog is going to do at all. A lot of people that I start working with training, I keep trying to tell them, stop trying to get the dog to get it right. Once you've already taught something. In the teaching phase, that's different. But when you're, all right, I've taught you something, now I want to see if it's going to function for you. You do not want to influence their choices. So that's the assessment piece, but you have to make sure you set this up safely. So here's an example.
Alright, stop walking, Izzy. Go into mean green.
Pretty quick. Don't let her like load off his hand.
So this is Volcano, the little dog that you saw earlier that was growling and nervous with the sustained eye contact. Now, did you guys notice at the end of that when she said, let's go, that when she turned and Volcano went right with her, joined up with her and left, didn't try to look back at the stranger at all. So again, that was Volcano. We know that you saw her earlier when she was growling at the students that were bending over and staring at her. So the assessment was we put somebody in the suit just in case, and you could see when she was given no information from her handler and a stranger just kind of approached right at them, she had what I would consider within normal range, some protective tendency and defensive reaction to like, hey, I want you to stay away. Then what was nice that we got to see is that she kind of recovered from that relatively quickly. She didn't stay on it. She didn't escalate from there. And that's why the handler was not basically telling her what to do. We're trying to assess, what are you going to do if somebody doesn't help you with this? Yeah, she's going to tell someone, this isn't right what you're doing, stay away, right? And then when we went into the routine, you could see that she relaxed. She didn't feel comfortable enough. She didn't consent to coming up to meet her, right? But you could see that she's like, oh, okay, I know the drill now. I know what we're doing. And then you can progress. So as soon as they've made their decision, that's why they said in that session, like, okay, we saw that, yes, she still's got some protective guarding tendency or defensive tendencies in there. Let's now roll right into working her through this and finishing the session. So that's what we mean by assess and then progress. So you go from not influencing, letting them choose, and then based upon the choice, you roll right into a training session. As soon as they behave, switch to influencing. Stranger danger dogs at home. Critical concepts that your dog is only going to get worse if you keep putting them away. Now, there are times when that's an appropriate management strategy, that your dog doesn't have the skills yet. I do it all the time when I have people coming over, or I don't have the time to go through it, or I know the person that I have coming over is not going to want to deal with me working with my dog. So there's times that I'll put them away, but I don't want that to be my only strategy because they're never going to get better. Demonstrate. Your job is to demonstrate your comfort level with the visitor and separate from your dog. So have setups at home where you can either put your dog in an area where they've got some kind of a barrier, but they can see what's going on and you can move comfortably. They have to see you engage naturally and normally with the person. It's really important. Or I love little tie down spots and areas where you can send them to place where they're tethered again, so you can move around so they can't break and rehearse anything wrong. You can relax.
So just keep repeating that. Face her and then.
Hey, what's up? How are you?
Can you guys, I would turn around and do the whole set. This the changing, it was when she turned her back is what you're saying? Okay, just do that again a couple times. Just diffuse that particular movement and then you can.
So come back?
Yeah.
So this is Dory again, the same one that will erupt. A lot of very strong protective tendencies. So as soon as a person was approaching her person and her, she would feel like she wanted to drive the person away. So this is another setup of, I can leave my dog and I can deal with you, and my dog is responsible for holding their own position. Okay. Lauren, will you remind me that I need a better example of that, like a home environment example of that? So no one ever, when you're at home, if you put your dog in like tie down space where they're supposed to be safe and observing, nobody is allowed to approach the dog when they're there at all. And you want to think to yourself, like, you don't want the dog to be able to hide. It depends. I mean, sometimes if they're in distress, they need to be able to hide, but you don't want them hiding for long. It's probably not helping because they're not improving and they're not observing. They're just taking themselves out of the situation. So sometimes you've got to close doors so they can't just run around to the back bedroom. Like if you're not worried that they're going to come and approach a person or go after the person, that's not what you're worried about. They're just going to run away and hide. Then I would close doors and keep them in an area with you. If they're taking treats, they're not as worried or as in distress as you thought. But again, I'm big on tossing treats now instead of hand feeding. And don't force the engagement between the dog and the visitor. Just let your dog become comfortable at first. And tethers are definitely your best friend at home. Did both of those, right? Yes. So teaching the home door routine, pretty critical. You're going to desensitize the trigger or the antecedent. So counter condition the knock or the ring to create an environmental cue. Lots of reps will mean that the ring equals go to place, the ring or the knock.
I'm trying to get this environment. Yes.
Hey. Good, Mama. Nice. Oh.
I love that dog.
You did it.
All right, so that's an example of teaching them that when you hear that, you're going to go to your place. Reward approximations, just like everything else that you're going to train and build upon. Getting to their place or their crate. I much prefer tethers and a nice comfy bed that they can hang out on instead of putting them in a crate, because the crate is more confined, more cornered, so to speak. With reps, they're going to start going on their own. Positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement to go to place. So you can think about that pulley system or body pressure. And then we'll have videos of all that. Holding place while you're heading to the door, while you're opening the door, while you're turning your back, while your voice changes. Hey, how are you? While you hug and greet the person. And when they're doing well with all these pieces, you're returning to them and rewarding them for holding place while all these new things are happening. And then you're going to have a body pressure or some kind of a pulley system to be able to reinforce them staying on place.
Hey, how's it going?
Hello. Good. How are you?
Doing all right. You fine?
Okay.
There's a body block. Positive punishment for breaking, negative reinforcement, pressure on when you're trying to get by me. Right.
Good boy. Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing all right. This is Kenny. He looks pretty interested this year. Do you possibly have any treats on you?
I think so.
Great.
I do.
Cool. If you get treats, then I'll FREE him.
Okay.
And then come say hi.
Okay.
And then you can give him some treats.
Cool.
I'll actually do an official, like,
Okay. And then give him treats.
yeah.
Okay.
And as soon as he, like, investigates and I see why he asked, then you can have some
Okay.
treats.
Perfect.
Check her out. Yes, good boy. You know
Nice.
exactly what's going on.
Good job.
Good boy. Kenny, please. Yes, good boy. Good boy. Cool. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
I'll be going now.
Have a nice day.
You too.
Pressure on and pressure off to get Grace place. Now again, he was comfortable with Lauren. Willem was comfortable with letting him be fed from hand. I still don't think there's anything wrong with us tossing treats and dropping them on the floor just in case. Kenny's trigger was more territorial, and because he was being tested and proofed by being fostered in one of our dorm rooms with Willem, and that was the thing, is that when people came into the room, he had more of a territorial trigger. and tether for safety if necessary. So if Willen was actually concerned that Kenny was going to be forward and really want to back a person out of the space, then he would have had him tethered to the bed or something. But he wasn't concerned about that. Practice makes perfect, like everything. DDD means practice with distance, duration, and distraction. So for the meet and greet routine, use novel items first. Just have something weird on the ground, and then you get them with you, and then you do the whole routine, and then they go check out that novel item. Then use known people, and then use real strangers in a controlled environment, and then you go to different locations and do it kind of really on the fly and out in public. Escalating your level of distraction and challenge. And when in doubt, if it starts to go badly, get out. Just get your feet moving and get your dog out of the situation. And for the home door routine, you use known people that will knock on the door at first, and then you use friendly visitors, and then legitimate strangers. And then tethers. Always go to tethers. If you are afraid that a dog is going to be either territorial or protective enough that they like people, but that first encounter, they just feel compelled to make somebody back off at first, tethers, 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 tethers. We love police systems. No. This is going to be you guys seeing me be like a normal person in a real house, not training like a clinical perfect trainer. Oops.
I'm sorry, don't do what I have yet. Good girl, Connor! Where's your... There they are. Good, Tilder. Tilder. Movie, come to place. Good, Tilder. Movie, face. Go on. Face with her. Thank you, yes. Attaboy, good. Place. Hey, come on in. Good. These are my dogs. They're trying to be very good dogs. Oh, good. Very nice. Check her out. Oh. Good. Nice. That was good. You did it. Look at it. Everybody. Oh, she wants to wow.
Okay, so that's using, Monica was known to the dogs. That's Monica that had been introduced to Moopy originally as a legitimate stranger, and then Monica ended up coming to work for us. So she was known to both Matilda and Moopy, so that was an impulse control. Like they're practicing all their skills and not breaking place and everything. And then eventually I'll do it with a real stranger, and that's a whole other challenge. So train, don't restrain. Okay, I'm doing okay on time. I can't believe it. I felt like I was way behind, but we're rocking it. Train, don't restrain, train, don't restrain, train, don't restrain. So important. So do solidify your foundational behaviors. Your basic leash manners, we call that fancy footwork. That's just the way that we teach it. Sit down in middle place with distance, duration, distraction before you even get into dealing with strangers, because your dogs have to have some really well-trained stationary stagnant position. And then go through the meet and greet and the home door routine. Proof and generalize, be very safe and creative when you do this. I mean, this is the funny thing about the Canine Center. The dogs that come to us, are like the last 2%ers, right? A lot of it's been tried and failed for them before. And we do not place the dogs directly. Normally, it's happened a couple of times, just circumstances like we've been out in public with some of the dogs in training to proof them, and somebody's fallen in love with them, and so we facilitate adoption. But generally speaking, our dogs are going to leave us and then go to a placement partner, where they're then going to be adopted. So they have to change location and be in a completely new place with people that don't handle the way we do. And then hopefully the training that we've installed is going to stick in some way, shape, or form to help them do better in that circumstance. And we send our dogs out with these really detailed reports that show all the training that they have. But how many times do people read that? So when we're talking about proofing and generalizing, we're trying to really talk about proofing and generalizing. And we've sent some dogs out that have struggled as soon as they've left our environment. And we've gone and picked them back up, and all right, well, we'll keep at it. We'll keep working on it, because we didn't get it as far as we thought we had as soon as they changed